Assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. Now, I guess you could say that Apple has been kind of stealing the headlines in the past week or so. They got new updates coming out. They announced an event coming out. They had some vulnerabilities come out, some malware exploitations. They've been kind of in the news, so we're going to cover that along with some other updates that I think you will be interested in hearing about. So with that, let's get into this week's trivia question, which is coined around 1979 by Stephen Wright. What is the name for a message, image, or feature hidden in software, a video game, a film, or another, usually electronic, medium? So what is the name of something that's hidden, a hidden message or image or something like that in some kind of software, movie, video game, etc.? And that is your trivia question for the week. Now, the Apple fanboys and fangirls out there, and the Apple evangelicalists, I guess, one of their biggest things that they love to preach is that Macs are superior because they are. The wording varies, but essentially what it boils down to is a Mac OS, and therefore Macs in general, are immune to viruses, which obviously is not true. We've been over this countless times on the podcast, and just to drive home the fact one more time for all of you, just this week there was a new malvertising campaign going on for macOS called Atomic Stealer. So basically, this malware is a Golang malware, so written in Go, available for $1,000 a month. Currently, I guess, still being actively maintained, according to the Hacker News article. So that's quite interesting. First came to light back in April of this year, 2023. And then obviously as things have gone on, it's been updated and whatnot. So basically what malvertising does, it basically uses Google Ads as a way to as a distribution vector for users that are searching for popular software, whether that's legitimate software or illegitimate software like pirated or cracked software or something like that. So basically what these will do, they'll post like bogus ads that kind of sort of look legit but aren't. So then you click on them and then you download, you go to a fraudulent website, download a bad installer or whatever, and boom, you got malware. So the macOS payload, I guess the thing that's being downloaded is called tradingview.dmg. So if you are on a Mac and you download something called tradingview.dmg, probably don't want to open it. Probably want to get that off your computer ASAP. But the version of the Atomic Stealer released at the end of June, basically what it does is it prompts the users to enter their password for a fake prompt, and then harvests files as well as other data stored in their iCloud keychain, web browsers, and all that good stuff. So, really going to town on the stealing your data aspect. And obviously the main goal of the malware, or really any malware running on a Mac, is to bypass the gatekeeper protections on macOS, which is essentially macOS's version of Windows Defender, more or less. It's like their firewall, basically, where they have various means in place to try to protect their users. One of the potentially more annoying things they do is the apps have to be signed and if they're not, the apps aren't signed appropriately. When you try to open the app for the first time, it'll give you a warning message, and sometimes depending on how you open it, it won't even open for you, and you have to like manually like right click it and click open and then manually select yes, open. Can be kind of a process, but obviously the goal is to keep you safe. But that's one of the things that Gatekeeper does. So the goal, obviously, of this malware and any other malware that runs on macOS is to bypass that protection. In case you just so anyone out there using a Mac needed another wake-up call that your Mac is not invulnerable to viruses, here you go. Now, for you that thinking I am a macOS hater, in case I haven't made it obvious enough on the podcast, I use a Mac as my daily driver, and I currently have two sitting next to me right now, one that I am using to record, and the other one I have the article pulled up here. Yeah, I'm with you. Usually, I sometimes maybe fall into that same vein, but also I do know that no device, no operating system is invulnerable to malware. The only device and only operating system that's invulnerable to malware is the computer that is unplugged, sitting in the corner of the room. So if it's not powered on and it's completely unplugged and there's no way for it to turn on, that is the only device that is fully protected from malware. But the second you turn it on, it is susceptible to being exploited through some kind of means. So just as a heads up for everyone. So with hacking stuff out of the way, Apple did push some new updates this week for their various different software platforms. iOS, watchOS, and macOS all got security updates, so definitely want to be installing those, since based on the patch notes, they are to patch exploits that are being actively or were being actively exploited. So definitely want to make sure that you update those if you are using any of those platforms. And with that, let's get into this week's cybersecurity tip. So rolling on to the theme of cybersecurity, keeping this train rolling, one thing that we've talked about numerous times is how to respond in the event of a cyber attack. It's definitely something that probably doesn't get as much attention as it should, since everyone is probably more rightly so. They're focused on how to prevent against cyber attacks, but then of course you have to have a plan in place of what happens if you do get susceptible or do have a cyber attack happen. And I saw a good article again by the Hacker News about the cost of a data breach and kind of going over some things that you want to be mindful of. And I thought it'd just be good as another refresher for everyone to kind of go over this stuff. So the first thing that they list here is consider your industry-specific risk. So this is basically referring to what industry are you in? Are you in the technology sphere? Do you do software? Are you healthcare? Are you public? Are you government? Are you financial sector? Are you a lawyer? Tons of different fields. And obviously, depending on what field you're in, you're going to be more susceptible to certain types of cyber attacks than others. Specifically, they mention here how the healthcare industry is one of the most impacted by data breaches. I think kind of maybe for obvious reasons, because there's a lot of good juicy data in medical records. That's one of the reasons why there's so many laws and regulations and protections that go into place about how medical records are to be handled. So it's definitely a very lucrative place that attackers want to get into when it comes to stealing data and exfiltrating data. So that is one thing that you definitely have to consider, is depending on industry that you're in. You have to be maybe more mindful of certain aspects than others, as far as like what data you have on your servers and that kind of a thing. And another thing that they also mention is detecting stolen credentials fast is vital. And this, I think, is a good thing that goes without saying, because as soon as you know that someone's account has been compromised, you want to take whatever precautions you need to either get that account suspended, deactivated, deleted, have the actual account owner change their password, whatever the case may be. You want to make sure that that compromise isn't a compromise for a long time, because the longer that an attacker has access, the more data they could exfiltrate, or the more time they can snoop around your infrastructure and kind of see what you're working with, maybe see if you're a good target or not, and then deploy an even more tailored version of malware to your specific setup to hit you even harder than just some random off-the-shelf malware that they could grab from the dark web or something. And so they cite here, the different types of ways that credentials are stolen. Phishing attacks, obviously, being one of the highest. And obviously, phishing attacks, some of them can be, harder to spot than others. But again, it kind of comes down to the big things that you want to look for, obviously, when dealing with any kind of phishing attack is, first off, if you are in a corporate structure. Some corporations do it differently, but sometimes corporations, and I think I've even seen schools do this too, that what they'll do is if an email is coming from someone outside your organization, so let's say if your email address is john@company.com, for example, and if you get an email from jane@thecompany.com, because it's a different, company, different domain there, that's going to get flagged by your email thing as saying like external or something to that effect, basically alerting you that this email did not come from inside your company, and potentially, I guess the theory is that you would have more caution when reading that email. But again, if we're going back to stolen credentials, if an attacker gets access to someone's credentials within your domain, inside your company, that obviously wouldn't do anything, because they would have access to, someone else's credentials inside the company. But the other thing too, when it comes to phishing attacks, is you want to make sure that any kind of links or attachments or anything that you really scrutinize before you actually decide to, okay, I'm going to open this. The links one is probably one of the easiest, because you can just do some looking at the URL, see what the URL is, see who sent the email. If their email address is filled with a bunch of nonsense, probably spam. If the email is, saying it's for your bank or something, and it's this super long string, and it has your bank's name, but it has like a bunch of other stuff all over it and around it, probably going to want to ignore that. And my main go-to rule of thumb is, if you see a link that you suspect could be a phishing attack, assume it is, and then whatever company or service or whatever is allegedly reaching out to you about whatever this potential phishing attack is, go to them directly, and then they'll be able to confirm or deny if whatever's in the alleged phishing attack is actually legit or not. So that is probably the best way that I would go about doing it. And again, if you're within a corporate structure, you can obviously forward the email up the chain to whoever your security people are and just ask them, hey, is this I got this potentially suspicious email. Is it okay to, click the link or download the attachment or whatever, and just kind of see if get their opinion on it first. So that's another thing that you can do. And then here, another thing they mention, using some kind of multi-factor authentication. Obviously, it's not perfect. Again, we've talked about if you're using SMS for your two-factor, it's better than not having a two-factor, but anything going over SMS is not encrypted, so theoretically, and we also talked about how attackers can steal phone numbers and hijack SMS messages, so it's not foolproof, but again, better than nothing. And another thing they have here is a rapid incident response. So again, if once an attack does happen, you want to be able to respond quickly to it to prevent the spread of the damage and to prevent as much of data exfiltration or ransomware damage or breaches to accounts and infrastructure, servers going offline, all that stuff that can happen within a cyber attack. You want to make sure that you can respond quickly to it, whether you have some kind of automated system set up, like some kind of an intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system that can potentially detect this stuff before it has a chance to do any kind of severe damage. And then if you have some kind of good network structure built in to segment off your network to prevent the kinds of lateral movement that attackers or malware could do if they do infiltrate. That's another thing to help improve your incident response. And then understanding your attack surface. So this one is pretty key because this is, what we talked about with, having ports open on your router, for example. The more ports you have open on your router, the larger your attack surface. If you have one server running like 30 different services all at once, you have a much larger attack surface on that one server than if you had individual servers each running a single, service on them. Because if you have one server that runs all your services, that's great and convenient, but if one of those services can be exploited, then your system can go down and all of your services go down. Whereas if you had it segmented into, say, you had 30 virtual machines for each one of your services, and you properly segmented your network, you might have the same thing of one of your services being exploited and get taken down, but you have a lot less there's a lot less likely of a chance of everything going down than if you had everything on, one system. So definitely wanting to minimize your attack surface is definitely something key that you want to make sure that you are evaluating when building up your Homelab, building up your server infrastructure, building up your infrastructure in the corporate world, wherever you are. You want to make sure you minimize your attack surface because the larger your attack surface, the easier it is for an attacker or malware, ransomware, any of that kind of stuff to get in. So quick review of some ways to prevent and recover from incidents like that. And I thought it was just good to go over. So that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. Now, Apple, again, going back to them, made headlines for their iPhone, Wonderlust event. But we all know it's the iPhone event. It's coming out in September. So that is going to be happening on Tuesday, which is September 12th. So obviously the big things to expect is the new iPhones. I believe there's also rumors of a new Apple Watch and AirPods Pro coming out, but based on some of the rumors that I've heard, more or less kind of sounds like the Apple Watch is a spec bump, not too much exciting happening, and the AirPods get USB-C charging cases now. So I guess that's cool. And as far as the iPhones go, they're coming out with the 15 line, the 15 and the 15 Plus, as well as the 15 Pro and Pro Max. So it seems like the conspiracy theory that I came up with last year where Apple was going to kind of do some kind of alternating sequence of going plus mini, or something like that, with them keeping the iPhone 13 mini around and launching the 14 Plus. Kind of seems like that might just be a pipe dream at this point, although I guess there potentially still is a chance. I guess you're telling me there's a chance, huh? That it could still be legit, seeing that they usually keep the baseline phones around for a couple years after their initial release. So like right now, if you go to Apple's website, you can still buy an iPhone 12. So that would mean once the 15 comes out, you would still be able to buy an iPhone 13. So maybe they'll do like a 2-year thing where they'll have the Plus for the 14 and the 15. And then when the iPhone 16 comes out and the iPhone 13 and 13 mini are no longer available, then they'll come out with a mini again. Obviously, this is complete conspiracy on my behalf. I have absolutely no evidence to back any of this up. This is all just wishful thinking. So who knows? But probably it kind of seems like they're settling in on the plus size for the new phones. But the big updates really come to the Pro lineup. The standard iPhone 15 and 15 Plus are not all that exciting from the rumors, at least that I've heard. They're getting the same chip that's currently in the 14 Pro and the 14 Max, which is basically what they did last year, where they took the iPhone 13 chip and kept it in the base 14 model. And I was saying, if you want to buy a new iPhone, just buy an iPhone 13 because it's literally the same thing. If you're thinking of getting the 14, and you could save yourself some money. But they're basically doing that same thing again, except this time you actually do get a chip upgrade. Granted, it's last year's chip, but at least you're getting a chip upgrade rather than being stuck on the same chip as last year. So that's a thing. But the big update is coming to the Pro line, where they're supposed to get the A17 chip, which is allegedly supposed to have a 3-nanometer process compared to the 5 nanometer process on the A16 chip. And basically, what this means, in layman's terms, is the transistor size is shrinking, which means all of those little things inside the chip that make the computer go burr and allow it to do all the calculations that it does and all that stuff and handle all the logic. If they're closer together, that means you can put more of them on the same size chip, which means you can have better power efficiency and potentially more power, depending on which side of the spectrum you want to go for and want to emphasize. So probably going to see some pretty large performance or battery life gains, I would assume, with the new 3-nanometer chips. And these are also the same chips that are supposed to also come to the new Macs later on this fall with the M3 line. They're rumored to be also having this 3-nanometer chip process, which should, again, increase the performance and efficiency. Depending on how Apple wants to go with it, they might keep the efficiency the same, but like really jack up their performance, or maybe kind of do a balance of the same thing. We'll see what they end up going with, but that's something to look for. And the other big rumor coming to the 15 Pro line is the switch to USB-C. I think it was kind of rumored that it might happen with the 14 Pro, and then it kind of got pushed. But supposedly, I guess we'll find out on Tuesday, is the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max are supposed to get USB-C, and I believe they're supposed to get like the basically Thunderbolt speeds, so like 40 gigabits per second. I believe that is what the 9 to 5 Mac article referenced here. But regardless, yeah, the main reason they're getting USB-C, in case you've been living under a rock, is the EU decided to mandate that all mobile, I think it's mobile devices in general, but at least like smartphones and whatnot, but I think it's like all mobile devices, mandate them to use USB-C by the end of 2024. And looking back through the 9 to 5 Mac article here, so it's rumored that the USB-C support on the 15 Pro and Pro Max would have up to Thunderbolt transfer speeds, which would be 40 gigabits per second. So that's just a rumor right now. But going back to the EU thing, so the EU came out with legislation mandating that all, I guess, mobile or smartphones at the very least would require USB-C by the end of 2024. Now, there's kind of two sides to the argument. Of course, you have Apple that is very much against and dislikes this ruling, in large part because of how much money they make off of Lightning accessories. But at the same time, Lightning is running off USB 2 speeds, which is 480, I think, megabytes per second. Or megabits, one of the two. It's pretty slow. It's not that fast. It's kind of old. So why Apple wants to defend Lightning is, I think, purely because they make a lot of money off of all the various accessories. Because if you didn't know, they have their Made for iPhone program, which is basically I think basically what it is, it's like a certification / license thing where they pay Apple a fee so that their Lightning accessories can be natively supported on like Lightning capable devices like iPhones. Because if you've ever bought a Lightning cable before that wasn't directly from Apple or a Made for iPhone licensed like product, usually what happens is it'll work fine for a while, and then you'll get this message saying that like this accessory is not supported or whatever, and it won't charge your phone or do any kind of data transfer or anything like that, and it's really annoying. Ask me how I know. So they obviously make a lot of money off that. Now there's also, I've heard rumors that they're basically gonna keep this thing alive and instead make it, well, they'll still use USB-C. If you don't get the Made for iPhone like certification or license or whatever for your peripheral or your cable or whatever, you'll be limited to the USB 2 speeds and not get the full feature set of USB-C and like full charging speeds and all that good stuff. You'd have to pay them more money in order to, get the rumored like Thunderbolt speeds or whatever, which, as sad as it is, I could honestly see them doing that because obviously they can't, like, I'm pretty sure it would be in violation of the EU law. Again, not a lawyer here, but this is just my outsider 300-foot or 1,000-foot or however high up view you want to take. I don't think that they could make a USB-C implementation that would only work with Apple certified cables because USB-C is just a generic USB standard. But anyway, so obviously you have Apple disagreeing with the decision, and then you have the other people that think it's fantastic because you only need to have one charger or one cable, and you don't have to worry about having a bunch of other cables for all your devices, which in fairness is a very, very nice perk. On the other hand, though, the EU also tried this over 10 years ago with micro USB, and that obviously failed. But imagine if that did pass, we would be stuck with micro USB, which, if you ask a lot of people, they really don't like that connector because whenever I try to use it, I always have to it always takes me like at least 2 or 3 times to try to plug the darn thing in the right way because I can never get it right on the first try. It's just like USB, right? And the USB-A connectors where you always have to take 2 turns to make sure you have it oriented the right way. In fairness, I've gotten a little bit better over the years. Sometimes I can get it first try. But then, of course, there's always the times where I do it, it doesn't plug in, then I flip it over, and then it plugs in. But micro USB, it's like I try to plug it in, doesn't work. I flip it over, try to plug it in again, doesn't work. Flip it back the other way, still doesn't work, and then I have to like manually contort the device and the cable to like really look at it, and then it finally goes in. Yeah, I think the main thing that the critics to the EU law have, which Apple, I guess, is one of them, is it would allegedly halt innovation, right? Because if you're mandating everyone use this one connector, then there's not going to be an innovation, right? Like if we all mandated everyone use micro USB, USB-C might never have ever become a thing, and you can basically ask anyone, USB-C is far superior than micro USB. So those are the arguments. I see both of them. I don't really have super strong opinions one way or the other. On the one hand, I don't necessarily like the fact that you're being required to a certain standard, but at the other time, I also like the fact of the convenience factor. Not that that really affects me all that much, but it is what it is. I see both sides. Both sides, in my opinion, make pretty valid points. So I'll leave that up to you to decide who is correct. But like we said, for the rest of the Apple products at this event, Apple Watch is pretty much just going to be a spec bump. And the AirPods Pro are supposedly getting USB-C charging case as well. And I also heard a rumor that you might be able to buy the USB-C charging case separately. So if you're rocking, like, I think the AirPods Pro 2, you could just buy a new case and get the USB-C functionality without actually having to buy new AirPods. Obviously, that case is not going to be cheap, but you would allegedly have that option to do so. So that is basically all the Apple craziness that's been going on. But that's not the only craziness that has gone on this week, because now we have to get into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. So I've been keeping you guys informed of the work that I did on Jeff Geerling's top 500 benchmark project, and how I made some changes to it, and I made a pull request and was kind of waiting on that. Well, if you followed along on GitHub this week, you would see that there is a new contributor listed on Jeff Geerling's top 500 benchmark, because my pull request got accepted and merged into his mainline branch, which I was very happy to see. We did have a little conversation back and forth. Not all the changes that I made actually got merged in. So basically what happened was he was thinking of potentially moving away from Atlas, which Atlas was the linear algebra, one of the tools that was being used as a part of this benchmark. And part of the issue that I ran into when using it was using deprecated or outdated and no longer supported system calls, specifically fgrep, and that would output a warning message, and that was basically completely messing up the output of the program, so it couldn't accurately read the system's specs and all that good stuff. So I had to write a 3 patches to patch the Atlas software in order for it actually to configure properly and then build and install itself and for the benchmark to be able to run on newer Linux systems that had newer versions of grep. I did an entire episode covering all of this. So if you're completely new and wondering what the heck I'm talking about, a couple episodes back, I did an episode covering this entire saga and went in more detail into the patches themselves. But that was just kind of a quick recap to get people back up to speed. So he was kind of thinking of potentially moving away from Atlas into using another piece of software, and he's currently looking at, I forget the two off the top of my head, but he's looking at a couple other options. And the thing he mentioned to me was he wanted me to split the Atlas patch into its own pull request, so he wouldn't merge this patch in only to then have to remove it if he decides to go with another linear algebra library or whatever, and basically get rid of Atlas, which I completely understood, made complete sense to me. Now, the nice thing was, because I already had all the work done and how I wrote the playbook that handled the Atlas patch, literally all I had to do was remove 2 tasks from the playbook, and that was literally it. Because I had one task that basically that checked the package versions that you had installed on the system, and then based on the package version of grep, it would then include or ignore the stuff for the Atlas patch. So I literally just removed those 2 things, and that was it, because the stuff for the Atlas patch was in its own separate file. So it made it super easy to basically make 2 different pull requests for it. Literally all I did was took the current state of my repo that had both the Atlas patch and the updated support for other operating systems, and then made a new branch from the current state, removed those 2 tasks and that other file, that being the Atlas stuff, and then pushed that to the master branch, and then that updated the pull request for adding support for new operating systems. And then I pushed the new branch that I made, which was literally just what it was before I took out the stuff for Atlas, pushed that to a new branch on my repository, and then opened another pull request from that branch, and bada bing, bada boom, we're good to go. So shortly after that, he approved the pull request, got it merged into his mainline branch, and it honestly felt pretty good to be merged in there. And like I said, when I first started down this path, I wasn't really doing it to contribute. The main thing I wanted to do was I wanted to, obviously have more support, because I wanted to be able to run this on other operating systems aside from just Debian-based systems. And I had a feeling there was probably other people out there too that probably fell into the same category as me. So I thought it'd be cool to be able to help out the community and add more support for it. And when Jeff finally responded to the initial pull request, like, he was totally all for it, like adding the additional support and whatnot. Now I will say, if you are planning, at least at the current state as of this recording, if you are planning on downloading the top 500 benchmark from Jeff's GitHub, and you're using something like a new version of Fedora or an Arch-based system, you're going to run into issues because the Atlas patch isn't included yet in his version of the repo, so it's still only on mine currently. And in order to get the Atlas patches, if you clone my repo, what you'll have to do is you have to do a git checkout into the Atlas patch branch, and then that'll have everything that you need in order to run it on newer systems. But yeah, Jeff's still working it out, potentially what to do with Atlas. So either he comes up with a new solution and the Atlas patch is obsolete, which is probably for the best in my opinion, or he inevitably decides that Atlas is going to stick around and then includes that patch in the future. But again, we'll see what happens. But yeah, so I guess I should thank everyone for having to sit through me talk about all of this, because the thing of it is, if you told me like a couple years ago, or even like way back at the very beginning of my software development journey, that I would be a contributor to an open source project on, GitHub or whatever, or GitLab, or any kind of open, freely available Git repo like that. I guess more specifically GitHub, since that's the I guess most well known. But in any case, if you told me I'd be a contributor to something on there that wasn't like specifically my repository or part of a school project that I was forced to put on there and work in a group or something, I probably would have told you that you're crazy and it would never happen. And even a couple years ago, I thought it was never going to happen because, I would see projects on, say GitHub that I was interested in and liked using, and I couldn't see anything that needed improving. I didn't necessarily have the skills to go looking for bugs and patch them, and I just didn't see, me having any kind of ability to contribute at all in any meaningful way. But then this comes along, and somehow, some way, I managed to find myself being able to be a contributor for it. So all this to say, I just want this whole saga to be a testament to any of the developers out there that thought that you could never contribute to an open source project, because if I can do it, I am certain that you can do it as well. It's just a matter of finding a project that you're passionate about, a project that you like using, and finding a way to get involved with it, finding a way to make it better. And honestly, one of the easiest ways that I've heard people float around is be the guy that writes documentation or does like testing or something, because if you do that, that could be one way to get your foot in the door as a contributor. You don't have to go down the wild rabbit hole of hacking through ancient, old, maybe not necessarily unsupported, but seeing that Atlas, I think the most recent update was from over 5 years ago, and that's the developer unstable branch. Hacking through that code, trying to hack it together to work and find a patch, that I will admit is kind of crazy and insane. So you can probably find easier ways to contribute. I mean, in all honesty, the finding or including additional OS support was very trivial compared to the Atlas patch portion, because literally if you've done anything with Ansible and like updating servers in general, it's pretty easy, because it was literally just install packages and that was it. And then Red Hat based distros had the minor caveat of them being actually using a firewall rather than just allowing everything in. So there was a little bit of configuration to do there, but again, that wasn't all that complicated. But regardless, I just wanted to, put that out there, that if you want to contribute to an open source project, you definitely can. I somehow managed to do it. I still don't know how I managed to do it, but I did. So if I can do it, I know that you guys out there can do it as well. And with that was kind of the big thing I wanted to highlight. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight was the past couple weeks, I've been talking about working on a C implementation of my encryption algorithm, which I did get that pushed this week. I also did realize that Windows, of course, it's always Windows, wasn't playing nice with the implementation in certain aspects. Specifically in regards to encrypting and decrypting directories when using multi-threading. So I inevitably decided to go with the idea of prompting the user for how many threads they want to run when encrypting or decrypting a directory, and just going with whatever they say. With a couple limitations. Obviously, first being if they don't enter a valid number, it just defaults to 1. If they enter something less than 1, it defaults to 1. And if they enter a number that's larger than the number of files found in the directory, it defaults to whatever the number of files found in the directory is. So those are basically the main limitations. But the issue I ran into on Windows, which I did not run into when doing my testing on Mac OS, Linux, and another Windows box that I was testing on in a virtual machine, what would happen is when I would encrypt with multiple threads, I was getting basically core dumps and seg faults, and the problem ended up being that I was freeing the memory allocated to the list of all the files that needed to be encrypted or decrypted before I actually processed them. And the reason that I deduced of why this was happening was because I was spinning off the threads and they were going to do their thing, and then the function decided to return back to the main function, at which point it would call free on the list of files because according to the flow of the program, at that point all of the files should have already been freed, so we can then go ahead and free the larger pointer to the pointer of strings because this is C world. So you have a pointer to a pointer, which essentially means an array of strings. So we freed all the strings already, so now we just have this array that we can now free because there's nothing in it. That's what the program assumed. But because the threads were still running, they hadn't had a chance to free everything, but we already freed the memory for the array that held those strings, so we were accessing memory we weren't allowed to, and the program was crashing. Why this didn't happen on macOS and Linux, it's C. That's basically, I think, all I really need to say. Just because it works on your machine does not mean it's going to work on someone else's machine, so you need to test it. So inevitably, it ended up being a fairly simple fix. Basically, what I ended up doing was just adding a mutex in there, which a mutex is, if you're not familiar with multi-threading principles, a mutex is basically a lock to prevent race conditions. So it prevents two threads from accessing the same data at the same time. So for probably the most classic example is the banking example, where if you're trying to both withdraw and deposit money at the same time, you want to make sure those happen in sequence rather than at the same time, so you don't go to deposit, $50, and the credit card company is taking their withdrawal from your payment, and that can really mess up your balance if they're done in the wrong order, and that's what's called a race condition. So in order to prevent the race condition, I basically just created a mutex that will have a counter increment how many threads are currently running, and then as each thread finishes, it decrements the counter by 1, and obviously put a mutex lock around that to make sure that only one thread is accessing that value at a time to prevent any kind of race condition. And then once that value gets to 0, meaning that no more threads are running, we can then return back to the main function and continue on our way. And then ended up fixing the problem. So woohoo. Fixing bugs that you didn't find originally, always a good time. Which that's, kind of, I guess, is another point too, is even when you think your code doesn't have bugs in it, it very well might, because when I was testing, I did not see that bug once. And then I just happened to be using a different Windows system than I was doing my initial testing on, which was a VM in my Homelab. And on that other Windows system, it had the issue. But the one thing that was also kind of interesting too was it was an intermittent issue, as usually things are with threads. Sometimes it happened, well, more often than not it happened, but sometimes it worked fine. So that's just kind of the nature of threads. Trying to debug threads is always a real fun time. So there's a chance it just didn't work in general, but the one or two times that I tested on my Windows VM, it either behaved itself or I just forgot to test the directory with threads function. I honestly don't remember. But regardless, it's fixed now. It's all good. And the last thing I wanted to touch on for this segment is a thing that Network Chuck did, which other people have done videos on it too, I've seen, is this tool called Notify. Specifically, it's NTFY, I guess pronounced Notify, which this thing is an absolute game changer. Because basically what it does is it allows you to send HTTP post request, which basically is a way that you can basically tell the server that here's some data to add, rather than GET request, which is when you request data from a server. So basically what you do is any kind of script, program, command, anything, you can append one of these post requests to a Notify server, which will then send a push notification to your phone letting you know that something happened. Now, if you can't already see why I think this is absolutely amazing, seeing how much I talk about my Homelab, I think you need to listen to more episodes of the podcast if you can't make that connection, because my goodness, is this thing incredible. So I have already set up a few of these said notifications, which I guess on the one hand, I haven't gotten any of them, which yes, I did test them to make sure they worked. But once I removed all of the forceful sending me of a notification, like, for instance, one of the things that I tested was checking to see if my IP address has changed. So I think I mentioned I wrote a script that basically pulls my global IP address of my house to see if it changed, so I know if I need to update the IP address for my VPN connection. So what I do is I basically store the IP address that I get in just a plain text file, and then compare that against the most recent thing that I pulled down. If they're the same, obviously my IP address didn't change. So in order to force the script to think my IP address changed, I just deleted the text file every time. So I would delete the text file, run the script, it would think my IP address changed, so it would then push the new IP address to my Linode server, and then it would send me a notification informing me that my IP address has changed and it is now this, and obviously this being the IP address that it has changed to. So I did that for a couple other scripts too. And boy, is it awesome. I also included it in my update script. So I have an Ansible script, in case you're unaware, that basically updates my entire Homelab stack and cloud stack. So it goes through all of my various VMs and servers and updates them, updates my Docker containers, updates my Bitwarden containers, updates all of the packages on the various servers for my Debian, Red Hat-based, and Arch-based systems, and it is amazing. But as my infrastructure has grown and the playbook has increased as I added more things to automatically update, because initially it was just updating, packages, but it has since, as I mentioned, it's updating things like Pi-hole, Docker containers, a lot of other stuff. So it takes a little bit to run. So now I was actually out and about this week, and I went on my phone, connected to my VPN, ran a single command to run the update script in the background on my command system, exited out, and then wouldn't you know it, a few minutes later, I got a nice message notification on my phone from Notify saying that my update had completed. And I was like, this is awesome. But that's not where I stopped, because another thing that I did was I did VPNing in reverse, I guess. So one thing that I wanted to do is I don't necessarily always know if my house loses internet connection or the power goes out if I'm away or whatnot. So I wanted to try to find a way to do that. And one thing that you can do with Notify is you can also self-host it, which obviously I did, but you can also use their site that they have as well. So what I did was, in order to be able to be able to get notified if something happens in my Homelab, if my Homelab goes down, was I put it actually in the cloud. So, which technically means it's publicly available, which is not good, but I did go through all of the hoops of making sure that it's all done through HTTPS, meaning it's all encrypted, as well as making it that I am the only user that can access any of the feeds on there, so no one can view any of the messages that I am posting on there because they don't have access to it. So I made sure that I went through as many potential security precautions as I could to harden that thing, obviously. Obviously, the other thing I did was, by default, it uses the default HTTP and HTTPS ports, that being 80 and 443. I obviously am not using those ports, so again, doing some improved security there. But regardless, the main reason I put it in the cloud was so I could be alerted if my home network goes down. And that would basically allow me to know if, like, I lost power or my internet just went out or whatever the case may be. I could hopefully get some kind of alert, or it also could be an alert that my IP address changed, and that could be something to look out for as well. But just, some nice to haves there. So basically how I ended up going about this was I already have a VPN connection to allow me from anywhere in the world to connect back into my Homelab. That's pretty established and pretty awesome. So basically all I did was allowed the cloud server to access the VPN into my home network. So basically what I set up was I set up a script to run on a schedule using a cron job, which allows it to run on a set schedule, to basically attempt to connect to my VPN at my house, and then wait a few seconds for the connection to be set and for the IP address to change, and then pull the IP address and compare the IP address when you are allegedly connected to the VPN compared to what your IP address was before. And if they're the same, just disconnect and go about your way. Otherwise, disconnect. Well, I guess you really can't disconnect because you never connected. But regardless, kill the process and send me an alert through Notify here saying, hey, your Homelab is unreachable at the moment. So that would be able to alert me if I was away from home, to let me know that my Homelab is down, which I guess on the one hand could be annoying. And the reason I say it could be annoying is I currently have it set for, I think, 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes, it'll run one of these tests, which obviously if I have a brief blip of a power outage, it might not even be detected at all. But if it's like last winter when I was home around Christmas and New Year's, my Homelab went down like the day after Christmas, somewhere around there. I think it was around like the 26th, maybe the 27th. And I didn't get back until like beginning of January. So that would have been every 15 minutes, nonstop, around the clock, notifications that my Homelab is down. And it's like, yes, I know, please stop. Which at that point, I probably would have just gone in and stopped the cron job because I would have gotten absolutely annoyed and fed up with being bombarded by those notifications. But it would be nice, just to kind of know, like, maybe I lost power. And then I'd, go home and see that the clocks on my like stove or whatever are blinking, be like, yep, lost power. Knew that a couple hours ago or a couple days ago or whatever. But I think since I actually have made the right moves to have all my servers reboot properly in the event of a power outage, that should never be an issue again. Keyword, of course, here being should, because who knows what could happen. But it was something that I was pretty happy to see, and obviously I did some testing there. Obviously I didn't shut off my home network, but basically what I did was, just as a quick test mechanism, just shut down my VM that runs my VPN, and then ran the script a few times, and then sure enough, couldn't connect to the VPN, so it assumed that my Homelab was down and sent me the notification. So it was really cool to see that. And then the last thing that I managed to get around to implementing this in was in my backup script. Now, I did not test it, so knowing my luck, the next time I try to run my backup script, something is going to crash and it's not actually going to complete. But I guess we'll see when I get there. But the idea here is that at each phase of the backup process, it will send me a notification letting me know that it finished X portion of the process. Because as it stands right now, I hit run, and then I'm pretty much in the dark for 15-ish hours while it goes through the whole process. Now, I can check in on it, but that means I have to manually connect back into my home network and then go to the log file and kind of see where it's at in the log file to kind of get a sense of where it's at. But now it'll notify me when the archive on the NAS is complete, when the checksum on the NAS is complete, when the transfer to the Xserve is complete, and then it notifies me when the entire thing is complete. Because obviously once the checksum is complete on the Xserve, at that point it's done anyway, because literally all it does is it copies the file back over and compares the checksums, which the time that takes is negligible. We're talking like maybe a couple seconds tops. So there's really no point in sending 2 back-to-back notifications like that. So it will be nice, assuming everything works properly, that I will, be able to get some notifications, as the update process is moving along, to make sure that we're making progress. So for anyone out there that's doing anything automation related or anything Homelab related, I personally haven't done it yet, but this is another great way. It's a great way that you can use this Notify thing is to integrate with not Guacamole. That's for remote connections. What am I thinking of? Uptime Kuma. That's what it is. So Uptime Kuma is another monitoring tool that you can like monitor uptime and whatnot. So this would be a good tool that you can actually integrate into Uptime Kuma, since I have Uptime Kuma running, but I don't really have any notifications set up. So if something goes down, it just goes down. And unless I happen to be looking at it at that time, I don't notice. So that would be potentially a good use for that you could set up notifications that way. But it's just in general to like monitor things, scripts that run in the background, to notify you if something goes wrong. Really handy and powerful tool. So I think definitely anyone that's been doing a lot of stuff with Homelabs, potentially a tool that you might want to look into, since I've been playing around with it for a little bit this past week, and I've already found a few really good use cases, at least I think they're good use cases, that I brought up today, and I'm probably just going to keep adding it to other various tasks that I do that run on schedules or just in general, because I think it's really cool. So with that, I think it's about time that we get back to our trivia question for the week. So this week's trivia question is coined around 1979 by Steve Wright. What is the name for a message, image, or feature hidden in software, a video game, a film, or other usually electronic medium? Now, if you said an Easter egg, you are correct. So Easter eggs, fun things that, specific video games, it's pretty common and popular in there. Also in TV and movies and stuff, hiding Easter eggs or hidden things that you really have to look for or kind of make connections to. So I thought that was a pretty cool trivia question for the week. Obviously next week we're going to have some coverage of the new. Allegedly, I think it's pretty safe to say that we are getting new iPhones. The Apple event, we'll have coverage of that next week. But as far as this week, if you enjoyed the episode this week, I ask that you leave it a rating and review and subscribe to the Dark Assassins podcast if you haven't done so already. And be sure to share it with a friend or family member. If you learned something here, maybe they'll learn something too. Potentially, if you know a developer that might want a pep talk, or you think they might need a pep talk to get them contributing to open source, at least I like to think that there was a decent one in this episode, but maybe I'm just way out in left field on that one. You can let me know. But if you have any questions about this episode or have any topics or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. There's a link for that down in the show notes below. And I'll say it, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Some of my favorite episodes of all time that I've done on the podcast is answering questions that you guys have had. So please shoot me any questions or topic ideas that you have. Love to hear from you. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.